Hello everyone, Interact back here again with another entity education video. In this video we're going to be covering a killer that a lot of people seem to have mixed feelings about how powerful she is, and an inflated view of how difficult they are to play, Lisa Sherwood, probably better known as the Hag. As always, I'll have timestamps up on the screen right now, and also down in the description of the video below if you want to skip around to certain sections. Let's get started out with the Hag's base stats. She is an original killer made by the people over at Behavior, and kind of set a trend when it comes to how Behavior designs killers with stronger powers. She does not have the same base movement speed as all other killers. She is slightly slower, moving at 110% or 4.4 meters per second. She also does not have the same base terror radius of other killers. She has a smaller terror radius of only 24 meters. You may also notice that she is actually smaller and shorter than all of the killers before her, and you'd be correct. Your camera is actually lowered down to the ground, and her model is a bit harder to see over terrain since she is shorter. Her vault speed, pickup speed, lunge distance, etc., all that is exactly the same as the other killers. They tend not to mess with those stats too much. Now let's move on to how her power functions. Her power is called the Blackened Catalyst, whatever that means. Essentially, she has the ability to draw a little triangle in the dirt, which will take you a base time of 2.2 seconds. This happy little triangle is known as a phantasm trap, and will trigger anytime a survivor moves within its circle of influence, for lack of a better term, as long as the survivor is not crouched. A quick note about that base time of 2.2 seconds that I just mentioned. This is broken into 3 phases, which will come into play when we talk about add-ons. You will start with a static 0.5 second opening phase, then move on to a 1 second setting phase, and finally end with a 0.7 second exiting phase. Only the 1 second setting phase will be modified by add-ons. The opening and exiting phases cannot be altered. When the trap is triggered, it will spawn a mud phantasm, which will pop out, scare the survivor who triggered it with a big old scream, and also force the survivor's camera to look at the mistake that they just made. These mud phantasms will stay spawned for a base time of 5.5 seconds. And will also always stare in the direction of the survivor who spawned them. So if you look at them, they'll basically tell you what direction the survivor went. They will also have the same terror radius and red stain as the Hag to trick survivors into thinking that it might possibly be you. You can have up to 10 traps placed around the map at any given time, and the game will keep count of how many you have left to place on your power icon in the bottom left. Once you've placed 10 traps, this number will be replaced by a recycling icon, which means that if you place another trap, it will remove the oldest trap still waiting on the ground, and place a new one. Now, this sounds cool and all, but how are these little triangles supposed to actually help you in killing the survivors, you ask? Well, once they trigger, you will get an audio cue, and the aura of the trap will turn white instead of the normal red. If you're within the base range of 40 meters away from the trap, you will get a prompt that will allow you to teleport to the trap that was triggered. This will obviously teleport you to that trap, and play a little animation showing that you have taken the place of the mud phantasm. This can be extremely powerful and helpful, since these traps will allow you to almost instantly close the distance between you and a survivor as long as you've placed your trap properly, and then literally slap them, since the Hag's weapon is actually just her hands. Well-placed traps can make downing survivors extremely easy, and this makes the Hag a very powerful killer in the right hands. We'll cover more about trap placement in the how to play portion of this video a little later on. As I've stated before in previous videos, the Hag is one of currently 4 killers whose power can be messed with directly by the survivors. If a survivor has a flashlight, they can shine it at the ground, and any trap in range of the beam will become highlighted, and then after a very brief duration, will get cleansed and cease to exist. You do get a small audio cue anytime a survivor cleanses a trap, but without knowing the aura of every single trap that you've placed in all of their locations, you can't really tell which one's being erased. This can be very annoying if you end up having a lobby with a lot of flashlights being brought in, or if survivors just get lucky and pull flashlights out of chests while in the trial. As with most of the light burn mechanics, this knowledge is kind of obscure, so you probably won't see it end up happening too much, but when it does, it can be extremely annoying, since without your traps, you're just kind of a slow 110% killer who's really short. Now before we get into the Hag's add-ons, let's talk a little bit about a new mechanic that was introduced with the Of Flesh and Mud chapter, totems. Totems will always be present on any given map, and there will be 5 of them spawned throughout the map. Totems are randomly spawned much like generators, where they will have a set spawn locations, scattered throughout the map, and it selects from this pool randomly. So with decent enough map knowledge, you can have an idea of where totems may have spawned. Totems will take survivors a base time of 1.4 seconds to cleanse. Once cleansed, the totems will be broken, and the bones and skull will lie scattered on the ground where it was cleansed. If the killer brings a hex perk, one of the 5 totems around the map will be randomly chosen as a hex totem. It will look the same as a normal totem, however the candles will be lit and it will emit a very slight crackling fire sound, as well as a little bit of light, so survivors will notice it pretty easily unless it's super well hidden behind something. If you do have a hex perk, the totem will show its aura to you until it is broken. Once a hex totem is broken, everyone on the map, not just the killer but all survivors, will get a noise notification notifying everyone that a hex totem has been cleansed. Once a totem is cleansed, hex or otherwise, they are unable to be respawned through any current mechanic in the game as of the making of this video. This is not a hint at a future patch or future killer or perk or anything. I just wanted to say that to cover myself in case they end up changing how totems work. I literally have no connections whatsoever to behavior. Now let's move on to the Hag's add-ons. Thankfully, most of these are pretty easy to understand and most have been data mined, so huzzah. We start at the common tier of add-ons with Rope Necklace. This will slightly reduce the time it takes you to set your phantasm traps. This means a reduction of 25% to your setting time, making it take a total of 1.95 seconds to draw your happy little triangle, because remember, as I said, this only affects the setting phase of the trap placement, not the opening or exiting phases. Next up, we have Powdered Eggshell, which will slightly increase the tripped duration of your phantasm traps. This means a 20% increase to the duration of your tripped traps, making them stay up for 6.6 seconds. Following that, we have Dead Fly Mud, which sounds disgusting. This add-on will slightly increase the distance at which the hag can teleport to her traps. Based on the trend commonly held by behaviors add-ons and some old data mine information, I believe this is a 25% increase to the distance at which you can teleport to your traps, making you able to teleport at a maximum distance of 50 meters. And Lisa's final common add-on is Bog Water, which will slightly increase the effective trap range of your phantasm traps. This means a 10% increase to the radius of the circle of influence thing of your trap. Once again, I can't really say what this equates to without confirmation from the devs or a dev kit to test it myself. Just know that it will make your traps trigger at a bit further of a distance, which I honestly don't know is very helpful at all, but maybe I'm just completely wrong, who knows. Moving on to Lisa's uncommon add-ons, we start off with Pussy Willow Catkins, which sounds like a furry stage name, but it's actually just the name of a flower, please calm down. This add-on will make it so that any survivor who triggers one of your traps will have their aura revealed for 3 seconds. Simple, neat, easy. Next up, we have another egg add-on, Half Eggshell. This add-on will moderately increase the tripped time of your phantasm traps. Say that 5 times fast. This means a 40% increase to the duration of your traps, making the phantasm stay spawned for a total of 7.7 seconds. Following that, we have another continuation in a cycle with Dragonfly Wings. Dragonfly Wings will moderately increase the distance at which you can teleport to your traps. Based on some old data mined information, I believe this means a 50% increase to the distance at which you can teleport to your traps, making you able to teleport to them at a maximum distance of 60 meters. Next up, we have the next in the line of the Necklet cycle, not sure what a necklet is, with Cypress Necklet. Cypress Necklet will moderately reduce the setting time of your phantasm traps. This means a 30% reduction in setting time, making it take a total of 1.9 seconds. And the final uncommon add-on, and our next installment in the water cycle of add-ons, we have Bloodied Water. Bloodied Water will moderately increase the effective range of your phantasm traps. Once again, I can't really confirm what this means, but the data mine information says it's a 20% increase to the effective range, which will make the little circle of influence that much bigger. Moving on to the Hag's rare add-ons, we start off with Willow Wreath. Willow Wreath will make it so any survivor who triggers your phantasm traps will have their aura revealed to you for 5 seconds. Once again, very simple. Next up in the Necklet cycle, we have Swamp Orchid Necklet. This will considerably reduce the setting time of your phantasm traps. According to the trend and data mine information, this means a 35% reduction to your setting time, making it take a total of 1.85 seconds. Following that, we have the next in our bug cycle with dried cicada. I know it might sound odd the way that I pronounce that to some of you, but I grew up in the southern portion of the United States where we obviously pronounce everything extremely correctly and don't have weird accents or nicknames or anything. Dried cicada, will considerably increase the distance at which you can teleport to your phantasm traps. This means a 75% increase to the maximum teleporting distance, allowing you to teleport at a maximum distance of 70 meters. And next up in the egg cycle, we have Cracked Turtle Egg. Cracked Turtle Egg will considerably increase the duration of your tripped phantasm traps. That is so hard to say. This means a 60% increase to their tripped time, making them stay up for 8.8 seconds. And our final rare add-on, and the last in our water cycle, is Bloodied Mud. You might say that doesn't have water anywhere in the name. Well, you need water to make mud. Be quiet. Bloodied Mud will considerably increase the effective range of your phantasm traps. Once again, no idea what this means, but the data mining says it's 30% in increase to the range. Now we move on to the Hag's very rare add-ons, where things start to get nice and spicy. We start off with Scarred Hand. Scarred Hand is a pretty transformative add-on, which means it does a lot of things and changes the way that you'll play the Hag. First of all, it will make your mud phantasms have collision, meaning you can use them to block off doorways, windows, pallets, tight corridors, etc. The drawback to this, however, is it removes your ability to teleport to your phantasm traps, so you're going to have to chase after survivors like a normal killer, even though you're slightly slower. It will also grant you a 300% increase to blood points in the deviousness category, which is pretty cool. It also has a line of text, which is basically just in there for insurance, trumps all other add-ons. This is basically just there to make sure 100% that you understand that you will not be able to teleport to a trap while using this add-on. Next up we have Rusty Shackles. Rusty Shackles will make it so your triggered traps will not spawn a mud phantasm, and will give no indication to the survivors that they have triggered a trap. This is slightly bugged at the moment, however, since being within a very close distance of where the mud phantasm would have spawned will give you an extremely loud heartbeat, notifying you that the Hag might still be teleporting behind you. Nothing personnel, kid. Next up we have an odd add-on that I don't really understand why it's in the game, but maybe I'm just not looking at it right. Grandma's Heart. Grandma's Heart will make it so when a phantasm trap is triggered, the mud phantasm's tear radius will be increased by 16 meters for as long as it stays up, and will remove the Hag's tear radius during this duration. This is kind of like Tinkerer, but in add-on form. It can be great if you want to do some weird shenanigans with tear radius, I guess, but honestly I don't really get it. And our last very rare add-on that I can't even find a use case for is Disfigured Ear. Disfigured Ear will make it so that any survivor who trips a phantasm trap will become deafened for 6 seconds. I don't really know why you'd want to deafen a survivor for 6 seconds, but you can if you equip this add-on, I guess. Feel free to leave a comment telling me why you would ever equip this add-on. I really don't understand it. Now we move on to the creme de la creme, the Hag's ultra rares. I honestly believe that the Hag has some of the best designed ultra rare add-ons in the game, given how much they warp her playstyle. And I think these are pretty much the gold standard for ultra rare add-ons, despite the fact that I barely play the Hag. We start off with a very transformative add-on, Waterlogged Shoe. Waterlogged Shoe will make any survivor within the range of a phantasm trap suffer from the hindered status effect, making them run at only 85% or 3.4 meters per second instead of the normal 100% or 4 meters per second. There is a slight typo on the add-on's text. I'm not sure if it's a typo or a bug, honestly, but it claims that this hindered effect only works when traps have been triggered, but the icon and the slow will appear for the survivor even on untriggered traps, as long as they're within the circle of influence. Waterlogged Shoe will also slightly increase your movement speed. Thankfully, this has been data mined, so I know that it will increase your movement speed to 4.5 meters per second, or 112.5% speed. Not quite base movement speed, but still pretty respectable. This add-on sounds pretty bonkers so far, you might be saying. Well, not so fast there, Timmy. There is the drawback of removing your ability to teleport to traps. Enter other ultra rare add-on, and probably the best, maybe the best add-on in the game, is Mint Rag. Mint Rag will grant you the ability to teleport to any trap on the map, at the cost of giving you a 15-second cooldown for that teleportation. Mint Rag is the reason that Trumps All Other Add-ons text is on Scarred Hand and should probably also be on Waterlogged Shoe. How you teleport to a trap with Mint Rag is you look at the aura of the trap you want to teleport to, and then press your alternate action button, which I believe is left control on PC by default. Something I did notice while playing games with Mint Rag is the 15-second cooldown for teleporting is a bit misleading. It's only a 15-second cooldown for the free teleporting. Any triggered trap that you teleport to will not be affected by this cooldown. Essentially, this just allows you to cut off people in chases, assuming you have a trap placed to cut them off with, and allows you to teleport to traps where survivors might be urban evading to avoid triggering them to let you teleport for free. Now let's get into some tips for playing the Hag. Let's start off with a very basic concept of how I believe is the best way to be playing the Hag. Essentially, if you don't have as many traps spread around the map as possible, you might as well just not play the Hag. You can have maybe 1 or 2 stored up for a rainy day, but essentially as soon as you spawn in, you should be placing traps scattered around where you spawned. Even if they aren't in super great trap placement spots, a trap stored up isn't doing anything for you, whereas a trap on the ground at least has some chance of getting you a free hit or giving you some intel or letting you teleport closer to a survivor. As the game goes on, and your traps start to get triggered and you're teleporting around and slapping survivors, make sure you're taking time when possible to replace traps, not necessarily in the same spots, but anywhere you might suspect will net you a free hit. In fact, I feel pretty comfortable saying you shouldn't be placing traps in the same places all the time, since survivors will probably see it coming. You're going to want to change it up every now and then to keep the survivors on their toes. Now let's talk about some specific trap placements that you might want to use. As with the trapper himself, you can use your traps at pallet loops and window loops. That's a fairly common tactic. With the Hag, you'll typically want to be placing your traps even further away from the pallet than the trapper, since if you teleport to the trap placed right under the pallet and then they drop it, you're gonna get stunned. The same applies to windows. Since mud phantasms don't have collision by default, and you want to be able to teleport in front of the survivor after they've vaulted, you want to place it decently far away from the window. The range for them to trigger is pretty generous, so you don't have to place them right next to the window. You can step it back a little bit. Now, as with the trapper, most survivors who have played even a decent amount will see these windows and pallet traps coming a mile away, and will either crouch to avoid them or burn them away with a flashlight. These traps mostly work if survivors are in a chase and they can't really afford to crouch down and move a little bit slower, but more often than not, survivors, if they know that you have a trap placed somewhere, will just trigger it when they know that you're either out of range to teleport to it, or you're busy carrying someone to a hook so you can't teleport, or you're in a chase so you're probably not going to leave that chase just to teleport, and they'll be erasing them by basically just running over them. Given that this will happen, and will probably happen more frequently if you continue to place your traps in the same spots, you're really going to need to mix it up. You do still want to have a few key pallet or windows traps placed, such as having one near the killer shack, or one on that stupid infinite basement thing on Haddonfield or Badham, or like the Ironworks window, things like that. You'll probably still want a few around pallet loops that are very safe, but keep in mind that you can just place a trap mid-chase and it'll typically force the survivors to either risk getting hit by the teleportation or just go to a different loop that is maybe less safe. Let's talk about ones that maybe aren't so obvious to newer players. The first one is fairly common, but once again might not be super obvious to a newer player, and that's placing a trap right next to a hook. This can either be done before you've even hooked a survivor to prepare the hook, or right after you do hook the survivor. Either way, this makes it so it's not very safe for survivors to dash right up to the unhook and pull them down, since if they aren't careful, you either can pull them off of the unhook or just slap them and get a free hit in. Another common place to use traps is right next to hex totems, to either grab someone off of trying to cleanse them if they're not very careful, or for intel that they're going near your hex totems to try and cleanse them. The same can be done near generators, so you have an idea of what generators are being worked on and which ones are being left alone. This obviously doesn't really counter survivors just crouch walking everywhere, either to the generators or to your totems, but it can help you maybe have some idea of where survivors are running around on the map. Another thing that I love doing just in general in Dead by Daylight, and one of the reasons I love playing Killer so much, is mind games. The Hag has some very nice mind games you can do. An easy mind game to do with the Hag is to make sure you have a trap placed at a pallet, and make sure you funnel the survivor into running to that pallet. You want to have them run so that they are on the other side of the pallet from you, and then the trap triggers. You might need to be a bit patient with this technique, but essentially, if it works, it'll leave them stuck between a rock and a fake hag. If they predict you to teleport to the trap on the other side, they'll run back towards you. Obviously, if they do this, ignore the teleport and just hit them. They might just panic and drop the pallet, in which case you teleport to the other side and hit them. They might panic, run back at you, and drop the pallet anyways, in which case you just stand still, hit them, and then break the pallet. More often than not, survivors expect you to be using your power to teleport, so the scenario in which they run back towards you is typically going to be happening more frequently. As I said, this is going to require you to possibly just take a pause, a quick second to think, do I teleport, do I not teleport, do I stand still? There's a little bit of patience involved with this. This technique also works basically in the same manner while you're at a window loop, but it does require a little bit more setup and a little quicker thinking, since you can't really run through the window. You have to vault it. But when it does work out, it's even more satisfying than working it at a pallet. Now with some tips for how to play the hag out of the way, let's get into our teachable perks. These have been changed on the PTR, and I assume that they are going to go live in the state that they are on the PTR, since they typically don't tweak them very much. So this is not the way that they are currently on live. This will be the way that they are when the Demise of the Faithful chapter comes out, which I believe is patch 2.6. Since I doubt they'll change much from the PTB to the live servers, they typically don't really mess too much with the perk numbers. Also, I'm already starting to regret saying the behavior designs killers with one good perk in mind and then 2 throwaway perks, because all of hers are pretty decent. At level 30, you unlock the Teachable for the perk Hex the Third Seal. Hex the Third Seal will make it so that one of the totems on the map will obviously be turned into a hex totem. Hitting any survivor will apply the blindness effect to them as long as the perk stays up and the totem is not cleansed. This will be applied to the most recent 2/3/4 survivors that you have hit. Since this is a hex perk, as I said, this will stay applied until the totem is broken, which could be in 2 seconds from the game starting, it could be the entirety of the match. Blindness is not the best status effect in this game by a large margin, but the third seal can be decent for confusing survivors as long as it stays up, since they won't be able to see friends knocked on the ground or even where their friends have been hooked. Not the best perk in the world, but probably not the worst either. And at level 35, you'll unlock the Teachable for the infamous perk Hex Ruin. Hex Ruin will obviously make one of the totems spawn as a hex totem, since it is a hex perk. While Hex Ruin stays standing, it will affect all survivors with the Ruin Hex. This will cause their generator skill checks to turn red, as well as making good skill checks regress the generator by 3/4/5%, and make great skill checks do nothing to help progress the generator. Hex Ruin is one of the most, if not the most, powerful perk in the game, as long as it doesn't get cleansed. The issue with it, as with most hex perks, is it feels like it either gets cleansed in the first 10 seconds of the match, or the survivors never find it. At higher ranks, very skilled survivors can typically make most of their great skill checks, making this only slow down their generator progress by a little bit. And finally, at level 40, you'll unlock the Teachable for the perk Hex Devour Hope. Yes, all of the Hag's perks are all hex perks, much like how all of Michael's were obsession perks. Behavior really goes all out when they find a new mechanic that they like. Devour Hope will obviously make a totem spawn as a hex totem. It will also grant you a token every time a survivor is unhooked and you are at least 24 meters away. At 2 tokens, you will gain a 3/4/5% increase to your speed for 10 seconds after hooking a survivor. I know it's so confusing, I don't know why it's designed that way. At 3 tokens, survivors will all suffer from the exposed status effect, making all of your basic strikes take them down in a single hit. And finally, at 5 tokens, you will gain the ability to mori survivors, even if they have not been hooked yet. This perk, like basically all other hex perks, is insanely strong as long as it doesn't get cleansed. Once you reach 3 tokens, unless survivors find the totem immediately and cleanse it, you basically just win. This hex perk does have the benefit of being one of the very few hex perks that won't show up on the survivor's HUD as soon as they touch generator, meaning that they might not be on the lookout for it until you hit that 3 token number, and you might get a few extra insta-downs. Or a survivor might just spawn on top of it and it'll be gone in the first 5 seconds. Oh well. Now let's get into the perk build section of the video. As always, I'll start with a build assuming you're a new player and have only put points into the hag and therefore only have her 3 teachable perks and the base killer perks, and then move on to a meta build assuming you have every perk in the game unlocked, and followed up with a few meme builds thrown in at the end to round it all out. Starting off with the new player build, your perk setup might look something like this: Hex Ruin, Hex Thrill of the Hunt, Hex Devour Hope, and Whispers. This build revolves pretty heavily around the fact that Hex perks are inherently more powerful than normal perks, since they can be removed from the game by survivors. Hex Ruin will slow down generator progress for you. Hex Devour Hope will make it so that as the game goes on, as long as you get your tokens and you're not camping them in the face, you'll become an unstoppable killing machine. And Hex Thrill of the Hunt will help guard your other Hex perks and slow down anyone who would dare try and cleanse your precious, precious totems. Whispers is there pretty much just to help you find survivors, since survivors might be crouch walking all over the map in order to not trigger any of your traps, and you might have a hard time finding them. Now moving on to our meta build. The typical meta build for the hag looks something along the lines of Barbecue and Chili, Hex Ruin, Make Your Choice, and then either Monitor and Abuse or Hex Haunted Ground. Barbecue and Ruin are pretty self-explanatory, they're extremely powerful. Make Your Choice makes it so any altruistic survivor trying to run away from an unhook or run to an unhook, as long as you're patient, will become an insta-down, as long as you have a trap placed there and you teleport to it at the right time. The final perk slot, the choice between Monitor and Abuse or Haunted Ground, is really a preference or playstyle decision. If you're worried about Hex Ruin being cleansed too early in the game and not doing enough to slow things down for you, Haunted Ground is a pretty good way to cover it up and maybe even snag you some free insta-downs if they cleanse the wrong totem. Monitor and Abuse will take advantage of the hag's already pretty stealthy nature due to her reduced size and terror radius. This will drop your terror radius down to a tiny 16 meters, the same as a baseline tier 2 Myers. It's really up to you, both are pretty good perks for the hag and take advantage of different strengths that she has. A few other perks that you might want to consider. Hex Thrill of the Hunt. If you want your totems to stay up even longer, this can be a decent alternative to Hex Haunted Ground, but in my opinion Haunted Ground is a little bit better since the insta-downs it might be giving you is fairly better than just slowing them down and cleansing a little bit and giving you a notification when they do start cleansing. Sloppy Butcher is always a nice alternative for slowing the game down by making healing take a bit longer if you don't really like the RNG associated with Hex Ruin. Pop Goes the Weasel is another one, and honestly one I say might be better on the hag than most killers, assuming that you go and use it and then someone trips a trap somewhere on the map, you can just kind of get right back into a chase after kicking the generator and using Pop Goes the Weasel. As always, I just wish they would give this perk some love. It has the potential to be really good, it just feels kind of meh at the moment. Discordance can be nice for finding groups of survivors and chasing them off of generators and maybe even running them into some of your traps and getting you some free hits. And a Nurse's Calling is always a strong choice, since wall hacks on healing survivors is never really a bad thing, and your lowered terror radius might make it so survivors don't hear your heartbeat and react fast enough to stop healing to hide themselves from a Nurse's Calling. Now let's get into the meme builds for the hag. I'm going to be honest, hag is probably close to being one of my least played killers, and I don't really know much about her builds. So I'm probably going to miss if there are any super popular builds, but here are 2 that I know of. The first one is going to be the Body Block or Battle Hag, not really sure what this one's commonly referred to as. This build revolves around having the add-ons Waterlogged Shoe and Scarred Hand. You can bring your typical meta perks, but you probably want to drop Make Your Choice, so you'd be running something along the lines of Barbecue and Chili, Hex Ruin, Hex Haunted Ground, and Monitor and Abuse. What you're going to want to do with this build is to basically place traps in choke points, such as right in front of window vaults, right in front of pallets, in tight corridors, etc. When your traps get triggered, you're going to be blocking the survivors off from being able to use any of these things because your mud phantasms do have collision. While the survivor is looking extremely confused by the fact that they can't run past what is normally a very passable object, you'll walk up behind them and slap them in the face. I love this build, mostly just because seeing survivors frantically try to find a gap and bashing their spacebar furiously to try and vault the window or drop a pallet is hilarious, while you just walk up behind them slightly faster than normal. Played well, this build isn't awful, but it's definitely not her best add-on setup in the world since you can't teleport at all. And the other one that I could think of, and I'm not really sure if it even has a name or anything, is just like a surprise or jump scare hag, something along those lines. You're going to want to bring the add-ons Rusty Shackles and Mint Rag, and your perk build will look something like Barbecue and Chili, Hex Ruin, Tinkerer, and then Surveillance or Discordance, 2 perks I thought I would never be recommending. The aim of this build is basically to place traps near-ish to generators, but not right on top of them, since you don't want them to be going off, and then wait until either Tinkerer or Surveillance or Discordance goes off so you know someone's there, and then you teleport behind them and scare them off the generator, or maybe even grab them off the generator. This one isn't really all that great or powerful, it's just kind of a meme build. You do have Mint Rag, so it's pretty good, but it can sort of be like a jump scare Myers build if you're using Tinkerer to sneak up on them mostly. It's just kind of a fun build that I thought I would throw in there at the end. And that's it for this episode of Entity Education, covering Lisa Sherwood, probably better known as the Hag. As always, I appreciate you watching, and if you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like or a comment with any builds I might have missed that you enjoy playing while you're playing as the Hag. Feel free to follow my Twitter, link up on the screen right now or down in the description, or follow my Twitch, also link on the screen or down in the description. I mostly stream Dead by Daylight Tuesday through Friday, and then a little bit on the nights, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. There's a full schedule in the information box thing below my Twitch channel. If you want to support this series and support me, feel free to head over to my Patreon, link on the screen, down in the description, etc., or subscribe to me on Twitch. As always, don't feel pressured or anything at all to donate any amount of money. This is just a hobby of mine. I enjoy making videos, I enjoy recording things, and maybe even, helping newer players or even experienced players kind of shore up their knowledge about killers in Dead by Daylight. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode, which should be covering Herman Carter, probably better known as the Doctor. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.